all of this is being supported by the British royal family as part of Operation Thaw.
Why have they flown a Press Association journalist and photographer from the UK over to Australia to cover this fake royal tour?
And little wonder why Harry and Meghan chose now for their latest cosplaying sham royal tour.
The narrative around Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is shifting again, and critics say this time it looks even more calculated than before. What seemed at first like a simple overseas trip to Australia is now being reframed by royal watchers as something far more intentional. Not a vacation, not even just a charity-focused visit, but a carefully structured performance designed to mirror the look, rhythm, and global impact of an official royal tour. And that's exactly where the controversy kicks in, because critics argue this wasn't just about being seen, it was about reshaping perception. During their time in Australia, Harry and Meghan followed a very familiar royal-style pattern: hospital visits, community engagements, walkabouts, photo opportunities with crowds, and tightly controlled media coverage. The same kind of schedule that has long defined how the monarchy presents itself on the world stage. Except there's one major difference. They are no longer working royals, and yet critics say everything about the tour still looked like one.
Harry never wanted to be a working royal, all right? He didn't want it. Yeah, he did. He wants it so badly. That is why he cannot breathe without a camera by him.
From UK-based media presence to highly curated images being circulated globally, questions started building about whether this was an attempt to recreate royal influence, without being bound by royal rules. Some experts have even suggested the idea of a parallel monarchy, operating outside the institution but still leaning on its legacy, symbolism, and worldwide recognition.
First of all, you can't unroyal Harry, even if you brouhaha.
It just unrolled Andrew.
2 seconds. Yeah, that was it. By the way, Piers, that was really uncomfortable when you were sitting there, Neanderthal style, placing Harry in the same bracket as Andrew.
And if that sounds strong, the online reaction has been even louder. Because for many observers, this isn't just about how things look, it's about why they look that way. There's a growing theory among critics that Prince Harry, in particular, may be testing the boundaries for some form of return, not necessarily going back full-time, but exploring a hybrid-style role that allows independence while still carrying royal-level influence. A structure like that, however, was already rejected back in 2020. At the time, the idea of being half in, half out was firmly turned down. The message from the institution was clear: you are either fully a working royal or you are not.
The Sussexes are down under and they're taking a reporter and a photographer with them to document the high-profile trip. Okay, you only take a reporter and a photographer with you when you are tightly trying to control the narrative.
But now some commentators are asking if that boundary is being quietly pushed again, because the current appearances look very different compared to their early post-royal period. Back then, the focus was separation. Stepping away, building distance, creating a new identity outside the system. Now, it's international tours, public engagements, carefully structured appearances, high visibility moments that look very similar to the system they left behind. And critics say that shift is not random. They describe it as a rebrand, one that uses royal-style presentation, but without royal restrictions. But the most controversial claim takes things even further. Some believe this entire Australia tour wasn't just an event series at all. It was a test, a trial run, not necessarily for another overseas appearance.
They know that they were never meant to be half in, half out. It was not allowed. They have gone out of their way to exploit their link.
But for something much bigger, something closer to home, the United Kingdom. Because with the upcoming Invictus Games event set to take place in Birmingham, speculation is now building that Prince Harry could return to the UK in a far more visible, public-facing way.
She said, "Call me Meg." She didn't even demand to be introduced as Duchess.
Right.
And still,
Let's
you have
call
a go
her
at the
Meg.
titles.
Let's quit the Duchess bullshit.
Okay, well, that's
right?
what she wants. Hi, Meg.
Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. No, I'm from Sussex. Piss off.
And critics say the timing doesn't feel random at all. The monarchy, under King Charles III, has been dealing with ongoing pressure, internal tensions, public scrutiny, and long-standing reputational challenges that haven't fully gone away. Add to that the continued controversy surrounding Prince Andrew, and some commentators argue the institution is still trying to steady its public image, which leads to a provocative question.
You only do that when this is A royal tour. This is exactly how the royal family operate when they are going overseas, when they have engagements even within the UK.
Do Harry and Meghan see an opening here? And some critics suggest the couple may be positioning themselves to step back into relevance, not by formally rejoining the royal family, but by acting as a modern global extension of it. A version designed for international audiences, younger audiences, media-driven audiences, and most importantly, a version built on their own rules. But not everyone agrees with that interpretation. In fact, many critics argue the opposite, that this approach creates a serious contradiction. Because while Harry and Meghan often emphasize independence, self-direction, and building their own identity, events like the Australia tour still rely heavily on royal-style structure, presentation, and symbolism. And that tension hasn't gone unnoticed. There are also growing questions about how these appearances are being put together. From photographer placement to location choices, from timing of public moments to the flow of coverage, critics say it all points towards something highly controlled. Not spontaneous, not random, but carefully managed. And that leads into one of the most debated topics around all of this: media influence.
Harry and Andrew in two very different categories, and I don't think you can put them in here. But there's one common thing that they both do, and that is damage the monarchy.
Right.
And that is what we're seeing, I think.
That's my point.
And I think that's what we're seeing in this tour.
Some commentators argue that Harry and Meghan have become extremely effective at shaping their public narrative, not necessarily through direct control, but through curated access, exclusive moments, and strategic visibility.
All of the optics pointed very heavily towards the fact that the palace were behind this. They had all of the Royal Rota photographers there. They had key high-profile journalists that work like this with the palace, whereby they are on the palace's side. They aren't going to give the media bad images of any of the royals. It is shot and covered.
Others take it even further, suggesting that certain parts of mainstream media have shown unusually positive coverage, raising questions about balance and objectivity. However, it's important to note that these claims remain heavily debated and far from settled. What is clear is this: Harry and Meghan continue to dominate headlines, and that in itself plays a major role in the bigger picture. Because in today's media world, attention equals power. Visibility becomes currency, and narrative becomes everything. So whether this was a genuine charity-focused visit, a calculated public relations move, or something somewhere in between,
they could be living the most incredible life. They could be having their foundation, doing their charity work, living in a mortgage-free house, and having a life of service, which they always claimed they wanted to do.
one thing is undeniable: people are watching. And as the next chapter gets closer, with possible UK appearances now on the horizon, the stakes are climbing even higher. Because if this really was just a dress rehearsal, like some critics are saying, then the real moment hasn't even happened yet. And when you take a closer look at what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle actually did in Australia, it becomes harder and harder to dismiss it as just another overseas visit. Critics aren't reacting on emotion alone anymore. They're pointing to very specific details, patterns, and choices that suggest something more intentional may have been happening behind the scenes. Let's start with the structure of the trip. In just a few days, the couple moved through multiple major cities, including Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra, and that alone stands out. This wasn't a single event or a casual stop-in appearance. It was a tightly organized, multi-city schedule. The kind of setup usually seen in official royal tours where visibility and reach are the main priority.
What is this tour? I don't understand what it is, because I've done many of these royal tours, and apart from, I was saying to Joe in the makeup room, apart from unveiling a plaque or planting a tree, this looks like a royal tour. And yet, at the weekend, they are going to be coining it in, and that's where I have a massive problem with this.
Then there's the type of engagements they focused on. They visited a children's hospital. They met with a women's refuge. They attended mental health-related initiatives. They appeared at public-facing events where crowds could gather, interact, and take photos. These aren't random picks. They match the same categories of appearances traditionally prioritized by working royals: healthcare, vulnerable communities, veterans, and public engagement.
The visit to the children's hospital, highly publicized. That's Meghan ripping something right out of Diana's playbook. Serving homeless women the other day, wearing Diana's $26,000 Cartier watch, wearing a Christian Dior tailored suit.
And critics say that level of alignment is too precise to ignore. Another detail that raised eyebrows was the presence of British media on the ground. A UK press reporter and photographer were reportedly flown in specifically to cover the trip. That's not typical for a private visit. Normally, international coverage is handled locally or through existing wire services. So bringing in dedicated UK media suggests something more deliberate. Not just reporting the story, but shaping how it looks globally. And that matters a lot. Because those images, Meghan engaging with children, Harry speaking with veterans, both of them positioned against well-known Australian backdrops, are now circulating worldwide.
These optics, the access to things like the World Health Organization when they went to Jordan, meeting with members of the royal fold in Jordan, going to Ukraine for Invictus, Australia, getting the mass optics that are kind of sending out like ding, 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 royal tour. This is the palace that are working behind the scenes to do this, in my opinion.
They don't just document the trip, they define it. They build a visual narrative of global relevance, public influence, and high-level engagement. Critics argue that this is exactly the goal, to create a perception that goes beyond a simple visit. There's also another layer being discussed: branding.
Let's not forget, the Tom Bower book was an absolute nightmare for the palace and for Harry and Meghan. That was never supposed to happen. So it's interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, Tom Bower is evaporated. Has anyone seen him? Can we check if Tom Bower is okay? He's been pushed right down the news agenda. We've then got Markle markling everyone, and dominating the news agenda with pictures of her and poorly children, women's refuge. This is exactly like when Prince Harry came back in September and, knowing he would get, I believe, criticism quite rightly, it was the bulletproof narrative.
During parts of the trip, Meghan was reportedly involved in meetings connected to her business ventures, including discussions around partnerships and supply chains. And that's where some critics raise concerns, because now you have charitable appearances sitting alongside commercial discussions.
How are Harry and Meghan representing this country right now? Okay, we are in the middle of a cost of living crisis and a fuel crisis here right now, and we are supposed to fork out money for these two on a quasi-royal tour when they are no longer working royals.
And traditionally, royal tours are very strict about separating public duty from private business interests. Mixing those two worlds, even indirectly, is seen by critics as crossing a line that the royal institution has always kept firmly in place. And that overlap is exactly what keeps fueling the debate. Then there's the timeline, and this is where things start to feel even more layered.
And now that they're doing some of these little pop-up charity PR opportunities, because they're certainly not royal engagements, it's harder to criticize them because the photographs that will be shown as we're criticizing them are them with small children that are ill.
Because this Australia tour didn't happen on its own, floating in isolation. It comes at a very specific moment, right before Harry is expected to return to the UK for the upcoming Invictus Games event in Birmingham. And that part isn't speculation. It's a confirmed engagement tied directly to a project he founded and continues to lead. What critics are focusing on is the sequence of events. Australia first, a highly visible, tightly structured, globally covered tour. Then the UK, a major international event with strong charitable backing and a direct connection to Harry's long-standing legacy. And when you line those up back to back, it starts to look like a narrative arc. And critics believe that arc may not be accidental. There are also individual moments from the tour that have drawn extra attention. For example, during a hospital visit, images showed close interactions with young children, some of whom are understood to have medical vulnerabilities. Critics raised questions about whether all precautionary steps were fully considered, especially given the risks associated with long-distance travel and public contact environments. No official issues were reported.
If you're driven by service, you do it day in, day out. But they only want to do it, don't they, when there's hundreds of people that can be photographed, cheering them on, or a branding board, or an incredibly poorly, brave little girl that's holding up a sign. When I saw that, I thought that must have been so daunting for that little girl.
But the concern itself became part of the wider debate about whether optics were being prioritized over caution in certain moments. Another area of scrutiny was crowd setup and event control. Footage from multiple appearances shows very organized environments, managed access points, carefully positioned spectators, and clear camera sightlines. Now, that level of planning isn't unusual for high-profile public figures, but critics point out that it closely resembles the kind of structure used in official royal or state visits. And that comparison is exactly what keeps coming up. Then there's the messaging itself. Throughout the tour, Harry and Meghan repeatedly emphasize themes they've spoken about for years: mental health, resilience, and public scrutiny. Meghan, in particular, has previously described intense online attention and criticism as part of her public experience. That narrative resurfaced again during the tour, reinforcing a storyline that has followed them for a long time. Critics argue this repetition is not random. They suggest it helps build continuity, linking past experiences to present appearances in a way that keeps the audience emotionally engaged. It reinforces struggle, but also visibility, and that combination keeps attention focused. However, not everyone agrees that this approach is sustainable. Some commentators say audiences eventually lose interest when the same themes are repeated without new direction or resolution. Others point out a growing tension between wanting privacy and continuing highly visible international tours. That contrast, they argue, is something viewers pick up on quickly. There's also renewed attention being placed on Harry's own past statements. In earlier interviews, he spoke about wanting to step away from the pressures of full royal life, often referencing how that environment affected his family and upbringing.
Consistently grifty behaviour. This is a woman that has never once taken accountability for anything she has done.
But critics now highlight a perceived contradiction, because his current lifestyle still includes global travel, public appearances, and constant media attention. In other words, the very system he once distanced himself from still plays a major role in his public presence today. And that contradiction has now become one of the most talked about points in the entire discussion. Adding even more complexity into the picture is the role of media partnerships. Over the past few years, Harry and Meghan have signed deals with major platforms, including streaming services, publishing companies, and media networks. Some of those projects have already been released, while others are still in development. And critics argue that this is where the Australia tour starts to connect to something bigger. They suggest that maintaining high visibility through international appearances helps keep public interest alive between major project drops, almost like a constant spotlight strategy. It creates a loop. Appearances generate attention. Attention drives interest in projects. Projects reinforce public relevance, and relevance then justifies more appearances. From that perspective, the Australia tour fits neatly into that cycle. Then there's the reaction inside the UK.
What about those children? They are immunocompromised. Harry and Meghan have just got off of a plane and they are ultimately putting those children at risk. The fault also lies with the hospital. This was a crazy move and it's all about optics for everyone, and this is unforgivable.
While public opinion remains divided, there is still a noticeable group of commentators who believe this kind of activity reflects an effort to stay connected to the royal conversation, without formally returning to the institution itself. The idea of a part-time royal role, once firmly rejected, is now being discussed again in some circles. Not as an official plan, but as a possibility people keep bringing up. There is no confirmation of this whatsoever. But the fact that the discussion exists at all is important, because it shows how blurred the public understanding has become around Harry's position. The line between inside and outside the royal world is no longer as clear as it once was. And that ambiguity, critics argue, actually works in their favor. It allows them to reference royal associations when it benefits them, while still maintaining independence when it doesn't. And that flexibility is exactly what some critics find most controversial, because it challenges long-standing expectations. It raises questions about consistency, fairness, and accountability. And it creates a situation where the monarchy, whether it responds or not, is still indirectly part of the global narrative surrounding them. So what comes next? All signs point in one direction. Visibility is not slowing down. With the Invictus Games event approaching in Birmingham, Harry is expected to return to the UK spotlight in a major way. And that means renewed media coverage, renewed public debate, and likely another wave of scrutiny around his ongoing relationship with the royal institution.
We're two people who have caused intense damage to the reputation of the royal family and the institution of the monarchy are now running a kind of renegade rival royal family engaging in rival tours and going to places like Australia, and that can only be ultimately more damaging for the actual royal family.
Whether Meghan joins him remains unclear. But if the Australia tour is any indication, critics expect the same pattern to continue. Structured appearances, carefully managed messaging, and strong visual moments designed to dominate attention. Because at this stage, critics say the pattern is impossible to miss. It doesn't look random. It doesn't feel accidental. It appears consistent, repeatable, and carefully built on familiar elements. And that is exactly why every new detail continues to draw attention. Not just what Harry and Meghan say, but what they actually do, where they go, who they meet, how everything is filmed, how those images are distributed to the world. Because critics argue that in those details, not the headlines, is where the real story is being told. When you strip everything back and look closely at what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle did during their Australia visit, a very specific pattern starts to stand out. And that's exactly what critics are focusing on. This wasn't a loose, casual trip. It was structured. Over roughly 4 days, the couple moved between Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra, completing a series of high-profile engagements in a tightly packed schedule.
We saw these Royal Rota journalists and these Royal Rota photographers and all of the establishment media start to work with Harry and Meghan.
And that alone mirrors something familiar. Official royal tours, short, intense, high-output visits designed to generate maximum media coverage in a short time. Then look at the actual locations they visited. One of the key stops was a children's hospital, and that's significant because hospital visits have long been a core part of royal engagements. They create emotional imagery, direct human connection, and strong media impact. Photos from that visit show Meghan sitting with young children, speaking with families, and engaging closely with patients. Another stop was a women's refuge, and again, critics say this is not random. Women's shelters and community support centers are often included in royal schedules because they connect to themes of social care, vulnerability, and public service. During that visit, the couple were photographed serving food, talking with staff, and interacting with residents. All moments that translate extremely easily into powerful press coverage. They also attended events connected to mental health and community well-being, which aligns with Harry's long-standing focus on mental health initiatives, including his work around the Invictus Games.
This was not a tour, rather a series of private business meetings looking at potential supply partners and chains for Meghan's as ever brand with not much media. The supply chains. You had Netflix as a supply chain, Meghan Markle, and you, apparently, according to your own testimony, thought they couldn't scale up your brand.
But what stands out to critics is how these more serious engagements were placed alongside highly visual public appearances, creating a blend of substance and optics in the same short trip. Then there were the public and sporting-related appearances. In Sydney, they were seen around harbour areas and open public spaces, locations that naturally attract crowds and produce strong visual imagery, landmarks, open environments, recognizable backdrops. These are exactly the kinds of settings that generate shareable, high-impact photos. And critics argue that this combination, hospitals, community centers, public landmarks, follows a very recognizable formula. A formula that closely resembles how royal tours are traditionally structured, balancing emotional, serious visits with highly visual, public-facing moments. But the logistics behind the trip raise even more questions. A UK-based press photographer and reporter were reportedly flown in specifically to cover the tour. And that detail matters, because for private individuals, that is not standard practice. Normally, local media or international wire services handle coverage on the ground. So bringing in dedicated UK press suggests something more intentional, a controlled approach to how the story is captured and distributed. Not just documenting events, but shaping how they are seen. And control matters, because the images coming out of these events are what ultimately shape global perception.
There is a go-to playbook move in PR. And when you are trying to deflect from negative coverage, when you are trying to shame people into not asking questions, you hide behind philanthropy.
In this case, those visuals were very consistent. Close-up interactions, smiling crowds, carefully framed moments that highlight connection, engagement, and accessibility. There are also signs of coordination at every stop. Crowd positioning, security presence, and timed arrivals all suggest that multiple teams were working together to ensure each appearance ran smoothly and looked camera-ready. And that kind of structure doesn't happen by accident. It requires planning between organizers, security teams, and event partners. Critics argue that this level of coordination pushes the trip beyond something casual or private. Even if it's not officially labeled that way, in execution it starts to resemble something much more formal. Another key detail being discussed is the messaging throughout the visit. Meghan has previously spoken about online harassment and intense public scrutiny, often describing herself as heavily targeted in digital spaces. During this trip, similar themes resurfaced again, especially in conversations around mental health and public pressure.
I cannot stand the fact that this woman and Harry are parading around Australia in what I believe is very much an entitled tour.
And critics say that consistency is important because it suggests the messaging is being carefully maintained across different appearances rather than changing from moment to moment. Harry, meanwhile, continues to center his public work around veterans and the Invictus Games. And that brings timing into focus. The next Invictus Games event is set to take place in Birmingham, a confirmed international event that will attract global attention, media coverage, and public figures from multiple countries. Harry's role is central to it. He founded the initiative, and it remains one of his most recognizable public commitments. So when critics look back at the Australia trip, they don't see isolated appearances. They see a sequence, a progression. Australia builds visibility and narrative momentum. Birmingham becomes the next major stage, and that sequence is exactly what fuels speculation about a possible re-entry into UK-focused visibility. Not necessarily as an official working royal, but as a high-profile public figure operating in similar spaces and drawing similar attention.
The point remains, Harry and the palace, I believe, are absolutely milking these vulnerable moments.
There's also the commercial layer to consider. Reports suggest Meghan used parts of the trip to explore business-related conversations connected to her brand and wider ventures. While details remain limited, the overlap between commercial discussions and charitable appearances has drawn criticism. Because traditionally, royal-style engagements have kept those worlds completely separate. Public service on one side, private commercial activity on the other. Blending them introduces questions about intent, whether these appearances are purely charitable or also contribute to broader brand positioning. And that overlap has become one of the most heavily debated parts of the entire discussion. Then there's the historical context. Back in 2020, the idea of Harry and Meghan operating in a half-in, half-out royal role was firmly rejected. They stepped away from official duties, relocated, and began building independent careers. At that time, the boundary between royal life and private life seemed very clear. But critics now argue that the current pattern, global tours, structured appearances, and consistent media visibility, begins to resemble something close to that previously rejected model, but only in function. And that's exactly where the tension really sits.
He is obsessed with fame. He literally, it's like the oxygen for him. I'm starting to think he's the male Kim Kardashian without the boobs and the bum.
Because even though Harry and Meghan are not officially representing the monarchy, their activities still lean heavily on the recognition, status, and global awareness that comes with their royal titles. And critics say that overlap is impossible to ignore. Another major point being raised is public reaction. Footage from Australia showed mixed responses. In some areas, crowds gathered enthusiastically, taking photos, engaging directly, clearly excited to see them. But in other places, the energy felt more muted, more reserved. And when you look at local polling data from various outlets, it suggests something interesting. A large portion of the public felt the visit didn't significantly change their overall opinion of the couple. And that matters, because it shows that while the tour created visibility, it didn't necessarily shift perception in a meaningful way. Which brings everything back to one key question. What did this trip actually accomplish? From a factual standpoint, there are clear outcomes. It generated global media coverage. It reinforced Harry's public association with veterans and mental health advocacy. It placed Meghan in both charitable and business-related contexts. And it produced a stream of high-visibility images and narratives that continue to circulate across media platforms. But when it comes to impact on public standing, that's far less clear. Critics argue that increased visibility can actually bring increased scrutiny. because the more polished and structured these appearances become, the more they resemble official royal tours in style and execution. And that comparison is hard to avoid, especially when the elements feel so familiar: locations, scheduling, security presence, and media coordination.
GB News has even been captured by Harry and Meghan Markle. And I've done it in a few ways. There was a meeting with a billionaire who Meghan was close to, who had some links to one of the billionaires who run GB News. So that shows you how they do it on like a very deep state type level.
Looking ahead, all of this feeds directly into what comes next in the UK. Heck, with Birmingham approaching and Harry's confirmed involvement in the Invictus Games, another major public moment is on the horizon. Another opportunity for high-profile appearances. Another chance to observe how he positions himself on a global stage. And possibly another moment where the lines between former royal, independent public figure and international personality become even harder to define. For now, the facts are straightforward. This was not a casual trip. It was planned, structured, carefully executed. It included coordinated events, controlled media presence, strategic timing, and consistent messaging across appearances. And whether someone sees that as smart strategy or controversial optics, that depends entirely on interpretation. And that's where this entire story ultimately lands. Because whether you view it as coincidence, calculated planning, or something in between, one thing is undeniable: this conversation isn't fading away anytime soon. Now the question turns to you. Do you see this as just another international visit, or something closer to a quiet attempt to re-enter the royal spotlight?